The wrench slips in his sweating palm. Petty Officer, Second Class. Robert Williams adjusts his grip and tries again, feeling for the precise amount of torque that will seal the valve without over-tightening threads that have already endured 6 months of Pacific salt air and combat vibrations. In the suffocating heat of USS Salamone's fuel-handling compartment, every tool feels slippery. Every surface radiates stored thermal energy from the day's brutal sun. Every breath tastes of high-octane aviation gasoline and the metallic tang of superheated steel. But Williams doesn't notice the discomfort anymore. His attention has narrowed to a single point of mechanical contact, where human judgment meets engineering tolerance, where the difference between tight enough and too tight will determine whether he prevents a disaster or creates one. The pressure gauge reads normal. The fuel lines show no visible stress. Every system indicator suggests that valve 7 alpha is functioning within acceptable parameters, that this routine maintenance check can be completed with standard procedures, that nothing about this moment requires anything beyond the mechanical competence that the Navy has trained him to perform reliably under any conditions. But Williams feels something wrong in the metal resistance against his wrench, a subtle variation in the way the valve threads respond to rotational force, a microscopic deviation from the tactile feedback that 18 months of identical maintenance procedures have taught his hands to recognize as normal. He stops turning. In the mechanical systems that keep naval vessels operational, stopping is often more important than continuing, hesitation more valuable than confidence, the ability to recognize anomaly more crucial than the skill to follow procedures correctly. Williams has performed this exact valve maintenance 1,247 times since joining Salamone's engineering crew. He knows how the wrench should feel when the valve seats properly, how much resistance indicates appropriate seal compression, what the metal sounds like when torque is distributed evenly through threads that will hold against pressures designed to move thousands of gallons of aviation fuel through systems that must function perfectly while under enemy fire. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't sound right. And in the floating fuel depot that Ulithi Atoll has become for the Pacific Fleet's largest naval operation in history, doesn't feel right is the difference between controlled energy and explosive chain reaction, between fuel systems that support airstrikes against Japanese positions and fuel systems that incinerate 10 ships and 3,000 American sailors in a single, catastrophic failure that begins with one valve that somebody should have checked more carefully. This is November 1943. The Pacific Theater has become a logistics war disguised as a combat war, where victory depends less on the courage of Marines hitting beaches than on the competence of sailors maintaining fuel systems, ammunition handling, the invisible infrastructure of mechanical reliability that allows American forces to project power across distances that would have been impossible without the kind of engineering precision that Robert Williams represents. But precision is fragile. Mechanical systems fail in ways that engineers cannot predict, under conditions that designers never anticipated, through the accumulation of tiny deviations from optimal performance that individually mean nothing but collectively create catastrophic vulnerabilities that reveal themselves only when it's too late to prevent the disasters they enable. Ulithi Atoll exists as proof that logistics can be weaponized, that controlling fuel supply is equivalent to controlling military outcomes, that the sailor who maintains fuel systems correctly is as strategically important as the pilot who delivers ordnance to targets. But Ulithi also exists as a demonstration of vulnerability, a floating concentration of everything that explodes, packed into a lagoon small enough that one major fuel fire could eliminate the Pacific Fleet's capacity to support operations across thousands of miles of ocean. 10 ships, 40,000 tons of aviation gasoline, ammunition stores that include everything from small arms cartridges to naval artillery shells designed to penetrate battleship armor. All of it connected through fuel lines and electrical systems and mechanical linkages that create networks of potential failure. cascading vulnerabilities that could transform routine equipment malfunction into strategic disaster. Williams understands none of this strategic context. His world extends exactly as far as the mechanical systems for which he is personally responsible, the specific valves and gauges and fuel lines that he maintains according to procedures that someone else designed, for purposes that someone else determined, as part of operations that someone else plans and directs. He knows that Valve 7 Alpha controls fuel flow between the primary storage tanks and the distribution manifold that services the other ships anchored in Ulysses' protected waters. He knows that fuel system failures can create fires, explosions, the kind of mechanical disasters that kill sailors and disable ships and compromise missions in ways that enemy action rarely achieves. What he doesn't know is that the valve he's adjusting sits at a critical junction in fuel distribution systems that connect Salamone to 9 other vessels. That overpressurization at this specific point could trigger pressure waves that propagate through the entire network faster than human reaction time can respond to contain them. The engineering manuals describe Valve 7 Alpha as a standard fuel control mechanism, rated for pressures up to 400 psi, designed with safety margins that should prevent catastrophic failure under any conditions that naval vessels are likely to encounter during normal operations. But normal operations don't include the constant vibration of sustained combat maneuvering, the thermal cycling that occurs when ships operate in tropical waters while handling fuel that was refined in temperate climates, the subtle metallurgical changes that occur when steel components spend months exposed to salt air and mechanical stress and temperature, variations that slowly alter the molecular structure of metal alloys in ways that reduce their capacity to contain pressures they were originally designed to handle safely. Williams learned to recognize these subtle changes not from technical manuals but from 18 months of daily contact with mechanical systems that wear out faster under combat conditions than anyone predicted when the equipment was initially specified. His hands have developed sensitivity to variations in metal response that formal training never taught him. Intuitive understanding of how components behave when they're beginning to fail in ways that instruments cannot measure. Tactile knowledge that comes only from repetitive contact with systems that gradually change their operational characteristics as they accumulate. Damage too small to detect through normal inspection. Procedures but significant enough to create dangerous vulnerabilities. The wrench feels different because the valve is different. Not broken, not visibly damaged, not failing any of the standard tests that determine whether components need replacement or repair, but changed in ways that make it respond to normal maintenance procedures with abnormal resistance, altered in ways that standard torque specifications might not account for, weakened in ways that could transform routine valve adjustment into catastrophic system failure if the sailor performing the work lacks the experience to recognize that standard procedures are insufficient for non-standard conditions. Williams makes the decision that separates competent technicians from exceptional ones. Instead of continuing with the valve adjustment according to established procedures, he stops working and begins investigating, treating the anomalous resistance as information rather than obstacle, evidence that something in the system requires analysis rather than simple mechanical force. He checks the pressure readings again, comparing current values to the baseline measurements he recorded before beginning the maintenance work. He examines the valve housing for signs of stress, corrosion, structural changes that might explain why the threads are responding differently than expected. He traces the fuel lines connected to Valve 7 Alpha, looking for evidence of pressure irregularities, blockages, thermal damage that might be creating back pressure in the system. What he discovers transforms routine maintenance into crisis management. The pressure gauge that reads normal at the valve location shows dangerous elevation when checked at the distribution manifold 20 feet away, indicating that fuel pressure is building in the lines between Valve 7 Alpha and the other ships connected to Salamone's fuel distribution network. The valve that feels resistant to normal torque adjustment is actually preventing overpressurization that could rupture fuel lines, ignite gasoline vapors, trigger explosions that would propagate through the connected vessels faster than damage control teams could respond to contain them. The valve isn't malfunctioning. It's compensating for malfunction elsewhere in the system, automatically adjusting its internal pressure regulation to prevent the kind of catastrophic failure that occurs when fuel systems designed for individual ship operations are connected to create networks that exceed their original safety specifications. Williams realizes that tightening the valve according to standard procedures would eliminate this automatic pressure regulation, allowing fuel pressure to build to levels that could rupture lines, ignite vapors, trigger the cascade of explosions that would destroy not only Salamone, but every ship connected to her fuel distribution system. The decision requires him to violate direct orders. Maintenance procedures specify that valve 7 alpha must be adjusted to precise torque specifications. That deviations from established procedures constitute negligence of duty. That individual sailors do not have authority to modify standard maintenance protocols based on personal judgment or intuitive assessment of mechanical conditions. But the decision also requires him to prevent disaster that will kill thousands of people if he follows orders that were written by engineers who never anticipated the specific combination of wear patterns, environmental stress, and operational demands that have altered the mechanical characteristics of systems they designed under laboratory conditions. Williams chooses prevention over procedure. Instead of tightening the valve to specification, he adjusts it to the precise point where fuel pressure stabilizes at safe levels throughout the distribution network, where the automatic pressure regulation continues to function, where the system maintains the delicate balance between adequate fuel flow and dangerous overpressurization. The adjustment requires mechanical sensitivity that cannot be taught in technical schools, intuitive understanding of how interconnected systems behave when individual components develop characteristics that formal specifications never anticipated. The kind of expertise that develops only through extended contact with machinery under conditions that test both equipment and operators beyond their designed limits. The work takes 6 hours. 6 hours of making microscopic adjustments, checking pressure readings throughout the fuel network, testing system responses under different operational loads, verifying that the valve adjustment maintains safe pressures while providing adequate fuel flow to support the flight operations that depend on reliable access to aviation gasoline. 6 hours during which Williams essentially redesigns fuel system operation based on real-time assessment of mechanical conditions that engineering manuals never described, creating custom maintenance procedures that balance safety requirements with operational demands that formal training never prepared him to manage. The result is invisible success. Fuel systems that continue to function safely. Ships that remain operational rather than becoming floating disasters. Flight operations that proceed without interruption rather than being cancelled due to fuel supply failures. 3,000 sailors who go to sleep alive rather than dying in explosions that would have been blamed on enemy action, mechanical failure, the inevitable risks of naval warfare, rather than on the maintenance procedures that created the vulnerabilities that enemy action exploited. No one notices. No reports are filed documenting the pressure anomaly that Williams discovered and corrected. No official recognition acknowledges the disaster that was prevented through violation of standard procedures by a sailor who lacked authority to make the decisions that saved thousands of lives. No medals are awarded for competence that prevented catastrophe through precisely the kind of individual initiative that military systems are designed to discourage, in favor of uniform compliance with procedures established by people who possess authority, but lack direct contact with the mechanical realities that determine whether those procedures succeed or fail under actual operational conditions. Williams returns to routine duties, continues performing the same valve maintenance that revealed the system vulnerability, gradually accumulates additional mechanical expertise that will prevent additional disasters that no one will notice. because catastrophes that don't happen leave no evidence of their prevented existence. His maintenance logs record only that valve 7 alpha was adjusted to maintain optimal system performance, that fuel pressure readings remained within acceptable ranges, that no unusual conditions required special attention or modification of standard procedures. But the fuel systems continue to function safely. The ships continue to operate without mechanical disasters. The Pacific Fleet continues to project power across distances that would be impossible without the kind of mechanical reliability that Robert Williams represents. The invisible competence of thousands of sailors whose daily work maintains the engineering infrastructure that allows military strategy to be implemented through tactical operations that depend absolutely on mechanical systems functioning correctly under conditions that constantly test their operational limits. The war ends. The Pacific Fleet demobilizes. Ships return to ports where they are decommissioned, sold for scrap, or converted to civilian use that no longer requires the kind of mechanical precision that combat operations demanded. Williams returns to civilian life, works in industrial maintenance, applies the mechanical expertise that naval service taught him to equipment that operates under less demanding conditions, serves communities that will never know how his wartime competence prevented disasters that could have changed the outcome of military operations and diplomatic negotiations that determined the post-war organization of global political power. But the valve remains, deep in the mechanical systems of ships that were eventually scrapped, in blueprints that document fuel distribution networks that no longer exist, in the institutional memory of engineers who designed systems that functioned more reliably than their specifications. Predicted? Because sailors like Williams possessed mechanical intuition that formal training cannot provide. The valve remains as evidence that competence creates safety margins that engineering calculations cannot account for. That individual expertise can compensate for design limitations that reveal themselves only under operational conditions that laboratory testing cannot replicate. Decades later, when naval engineers design fuel systems for new generations of warships, they include safety features that account for the kind of pressure irregularities that Williams discovered and corrected through valve adjustment that prevented catastrophic system failure. Modern fuel handling procedures include protocols for recognizing and responding to pressure anomalies that could indicate developing vulnerabilities in interconnected systems. Current maintenance training emphasizes the importance of mechanical intuition, tactile sensitivity, the kind of diagnostic expertise that enables technicians to recognize when standard procedures are insufficient for non-standard conditions. The improvements are credited to advances in engineering science, better understanding of metallurgy under stress, computational modeling that can predict system behavior under complex operational conditions. No documentation connects modern safety features to the specific incident that Williams prevented through violation of procedures that would have created the disaster that modern systems are designed to avoid. No historical record preserves the name of the sailor whose competence demonstrated the vulnerabilities that subsequent engineering eliminated through design. Improvements that prevent rather than respond to the kind of catastrophic failure that one valve adjustment prevented in November 1943. Sometimes, the most important work is the work that no one notices. Sometimes heroism looks like routine maintenance performed with exceptional competence, rather than extraordinary courage displayed under dramatic circumstances. Sometimes one sailor's mechanical intuition prevents disasters that would have killed thousands of people, altered military outcomes, changed the course of historical events that shaped the world that emerged from global conflict. The valve that Williams adjusted correctly continued to function safely for the remainder of the war. Through hundreds of fuel transfers, thousands of flight operations, the sustained mechanical stress of combat operations that tested every component of every system to its operational limits. It never failed catastrophically. It never created the explosion that would have destroyed 10 ships and killed 3,000 sailors. It functioned exactly as Williams adjusted it to function, maintaining the precise balance between adequate performance and safe operation that prevented disaster through mechanical competence that no one noticed, because catastrophes that don't happen leave no evidence of the expertise that prevented them. If stories like this remind you that heroes often work in darkness, unnoticed and unrewarded, that competence prevents more disasters than courage ever could, then perhaps there are other moments of invisible expertise worth remembering, worth honoring, worth carrying forward into whatever challenges require us to choose between following procedures that feel wrong and trusting the expertise that experience provides, even when that expertise contradicts official authority.